She sat alone in the quiet corner of a rain-soaked station lounge, her hands trembling over a cup of tea no one noticed, until a single father crossed the room, not to offer pity, but to sit beside her. Neither knew it yet, but in the next few hours, a choice would be made that would change her destination, and maybe her life forever. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel, and like the video, and tell us where you are watching from. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Now, let's jump into the story. The soft hum of the city train station's first-class lounge wrapped the space in a calm that felt almost too careful. Yellow lamps glowed in the corners, warming the deep leather chairs. Somewhere, a slow jazz tune played under the clink of teaspoons and the low murmur of voices. Beyond the tall glass windows, the rain fell steady, tracing thin silver lines down to the pavement below. Marceline Hart sat near the farthest window, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a tailored charcoal coat and a pale scarf, her hair pinned in a simple twist. Beside her, a polished mobility scooter rested quietly. She had been there for over an hour, waiting for her delayed train to a corporate gala she had no desire to attend. On the low table in front of her sat a delicate china teacup. When she reached for it, her fingers trembled, just slightly, enough to make the cup rattle against its saucer. She steadied it, lifted it carefully, and sipped without a sound. No one looked up. The lounge attendants moved swiftly past her, carrying trays and tending to other passengers. Conversations rose and fell around her, never touching her. She felt visible in the way a display might be, noticed but not approached. And yet at the same time, she felt unseen. Across the lounge, near the corner where the carpet faded into tile, Daniel Rowe knelt beside his son, Micah. The boy's backpack lay open on the seat, spilling colored pencils and sketchbooks. Daniel adjusted the zipper, then brushed a strand of hair from his son's face. He wore worn jeans, a plain sweater, and work boots that carried the dust of many long days. Their train connection had been canceled, and they were waiting for the next one to take them to his sister's small-town bookstore. While other passengers scrolled through phones or dozed, Micah was filling the time with quiet drawings. The boy's gaze wandered across the lounge. He saw the woman by the window, the way she sat so still, the way her teacup shook. Leaning close to his father, he whispered, "Dad, why is she sitting all by herself?" Daniel followed his son's glance. He noticed the careful stillness in her posture, the faint tension in her hands, and the polished control in her expression. Her coat and scarf were perfect, but something in her eyes seemed far away. He didn't see someone fragile. He saw someone holding herself together in a place that might not see her at all. "Stay here for a minute," he told Micah, his voice low. Daniel rose to his feet, sliding his hands into his pockets. He walked across the lounge slowly, not with the rush of someone on a mission, but with the steady pace of someone who had already decided this mattered. Marceline noticed his approach. The first thing she saw were his boots, scuffed and practical, out of place against the polished floor. Then she looked up and met his eyes. She tensed slightly. Strangers who came too close usually wanted something: information, a reaction, or worse, pity. But this man stopped at a respectful distance. He crouched so his eyes were level with hers. "Mind if I sit here until your train boards?" His tone was calm, without pressure, without a smile that asked for anything in return. For a moment, Marceline didn't answer. Then she gave the smallest nod. Daniel pulled a chair from the next table and set it beside hers. He didn't ask another question. He simply sat, Across the lounge, Micah watched them, resting his chin on his hands. He reached for a pencil and began to draw, the page filling with lines and color as the rain kept falling outside. In that quiet corner, without fanfare, the space between Marceline and Daniel began to change. She wrapped both hands around her teacup again, steadying it this time, not just against the tremor, but against the unfamiliar comfort of having someone choose to be there. And though no words had been spoken yet, the stillness no longer felt empty. It felt like the start of something neither of them could quite name. The rain tapped steadily against the glass, a soft background to the hum of the station lounge. Daniel sat with an easy stillness beside Marceline, his hands resting on his knees. She kept her gaze on the window for a while, watching the blurred shapes of passengers hurrying along the platform. At first, neither spoke. The silence felt different from the kind that surrounds strangers. It wasn't awkward. It carried a sense of space, like a quiet path between them where words could arrive when they were ready. Finally, Daniel nodded toward the cup in her hands. "Tea any good?" he asked, his voice low. She looked down at the pale liquid. "Not really," she replied. "But it's warm. That's enough." Her tone was calm, precise, the voice of someone who chose words carefully. He smiled, faintly. "Sounds like the coffee from the vending machine by the ticket hall. Terrible, but at least it's hot." The smallest curve of her lips appeared and faded again. "I'll take your word for it." They spoke slowly, as if testing the sound of conversation. Marceline mentioned her train to the capital, a formal event her father expected her to attend. "It's a schedule I didn't make," she said. "But apparently it's important I'm there." Daniel nodded. "Ours got canceled earlier. We're heading to my sister's place. She runs a little bookstore 2 towns over. Micah loves helping her stock the shelves." She glanced toward the boy, seated a few tables away, bent over his sketchpad. His small hands moved quickly, switching between colors. "He's very focused," she observed. "Always has been," Daniel said. "He can sit for hours with a pencil. Not something he got from me." The conversation paused, not in discomfort, but in a quiet rhythm that seemed natural. After a few minutes, Micah slid off his seat and walked toward them. He clutched a sheet of paper, the edges slightly bent. Without a word, he held it out to Marceline. She hesitated before taking it. On the page was a simple drawing, 3 figures sitting together on the station bench, the rain falling outside the tall windows. She recognized herself, Daniel and Micah, all smiling. Her breath caught. "You drew this?" she asked softly. Micah nodded. "It's for you." She looked down at the drawing again. Her voice was quiet. "It's beautiful." Daniel watched her expression change. The careful reserve in her face loosened. "Thank you," she said to Micah. "I don't remember the last time someone made something just for me." The boy gave a small shrug, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "You looked lonely. Now you're not." And with that, he returned to his table, pulling out another sheet of paper. Marceline traced the lines of the drawing with her fingertips, her hands steady now. She glanced at Daniel. "Your son notices things." "More than I do, most of the time," he replied. "He sees what's missing before I realize it's gone." Outside, the rain shifted from steady drops to a light drizzle, softening the view beyond the glass. The lounge lights reflected in the window, framing their silhouettes against the fading gray of the afternoon. Marceline set the drawing carefully on the table, almost as if it might break. "People usually only speak to me when they need something," she said, "or when they've already decided who I am." Daniel didn't try to answer that. Instead, he let the quiet hold her words in place. After a while, she asked, Do you often start conversations with strangers? Not really, he said. But Micah asked why you were alone, and I looked over. For a second, it felt like I'd seen that before. Sitting in a room full of people, feeling invisible. She studied him, as if weighing whether to believe him. There was no pity in his voice, only recognition. Her shoulders eased. Well, I suppose that makes us both a little less invisible. The lounge carried on around them. An attendant passed by with a tray of tea. A man in a gray coat read a newspaper by the far wall. The station announcements echoed faintly from the main hall. But in the small circle of space they shared, time seemed to slow. Marceline reached for her cup again, sipping the lukewarm tea without looking away from him. You don't seem in a hurry to get anywhere, she said. Daniel shook his head. The train will come when it comes. In the meantime, we're here. Might as well be here together. The corners of her mouth lifted again, brief but genuine. For the first time that day, the heaviness she carried didn't feel quite so heavy. In the corner, Micah bent his head over another drawing, his pencils scratching softly against the paper. The rain outside caught the glow of the street lamps, each drop glimmering for a moment before sliding out of sight. Neither Marceline nor Daniel knew where the conversation might lead, but both felt something had shifted. The silence between them no longer marked a distance. It had become a bridge. A station attendant stepped into the lounge, scanning the room before walking toward their table. His shoes clicked softly against the polished floor. He stopped beside Marceline and spoke with a professional tone. Miss Hart, your train will be boarding shortly at platform 3. Marceline looked past him toward the boarding gates. The words settled over her like a quiet reminder of the life waiting for her beyond the station walls. She gave a small nod, thanking him. As the attendant moved away, she kept her eyes on the gate for a moment longer, then glanced back at Daniel. I should probably head over, she said, though her voice didn't carry much conviction. Daniel stood as if ready to walk her there, but instead of reaching for her scooter, she paused. Would you walk with me to the platform? She asked. Of course, he replied without hesitation. They moved together toward the gates, Daniel keeping a steady pace beside her. Micah followed a few steps behind, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. Halfway there, Marceline slowed as they passed a quiet corridor leading to the vending machines. The area was dimmer, the polished wood floor giving way to simple tile. She stopped, her hand resting lightly on the scooter controls. Coffee? She asked. Daniel's brow lifted slightly. From that machine? You're brave. Maybe I am, she said, steering down the narrow hall. The vending area was almost empty, the hum of the machine filling the space. Marceline maneuvered herself forward slowly, her hands gripping the controls with more determination than strength. Her movements weren't quick, but each inch felt deliberate. Daniel didn't touch the scooter, walking beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Micah darted ahead, pressing his face close to the display of snacks. They even have those tiny muffins, he announced. Marceline reached the coffee machine and studied the faded buttons. Which one's safe? She asked. Safe? Daniel chuckled. None of them, but espresso's the fastest. He pressed the button, and the machine groaned before releasing a thin stream into the paper cup. He handed it to her carefully. She took it in both hands, sipping slowly. The taste made her eyes narrow. You weren't exaggerating. I told you, he said, lifting his own cup. Terrible, but earned. For a moment, they stood there, the sound of rain against the small window mixing with the faint hum of the vending machine. Marceline's gaze stayed on her cup. I haven't been in control of where I go for months, she said. Since the accident, everything's been planned for me. Meetings, appointments, even rest. I just follow the schedule. Daniel leaned against the wall, listening. This trip, she continued, is for my father's company. Another event where I'm the silent face at his side. I'm supposed to board that train, go to the capital, and play the part. She looked up at him then. But what happens if I don't? His voice was steady. You'd find out. Maybe you'd end up somewhere better. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out. The screen lit up with her father's name. She stared at it for a moment, then set it face down on the table beside the machine. The call went unanswered. Micah settled cross-legged on the floor nearby, sketching again without asking permission. Marceline took another sip of coffee. If I stayed here instead of boarding, I wouldn't know where I'm going next. No plan, no one waiting. Daniel met her gaze. That's not the same as being los. She held his eyes, the thoughts settling in her mind like something that had been waiting to surface. The station announcements echoed faintly from the main hall, calling passengers to various platforms. Her train would be leaving soon. She glanced in the direction of the gates, then back at the quiet vending area. The rain outside softened to a drizzle, streaking the glass with silver trails. She watched it for a long moment before speaking again. Sometimes I think I've forgotten what it feels like to make my own choices. Daniel nodded toward the coffee cup in her hands. You made one just now. She smiled at that. Small but real. And it's terrible coffee. But it's yours, he said. Marceline let out a quiet laugh. The sound was light, almost surprising to her own ears. The moment stretched between them, unhurried. The decision wasn't final yet, but the weight of it was already in the air. Something in her posture had shifted, less like someone waiting for instructions, more like someone beginning to consider her own path. And somewhere between the bitter coffee, the rain, and the quiet company, Marceline Hart began to imagine a different destination. Sat at the small table beside the vending machine, her coffee cooling in the paper cup. The station announcements drifted faintly from the main hall, calling passengers to board. Her train to the capital was minutes from departure. Still, she didn't move. Micah leaned against his father's side, showing him a new drawing. In this one, 3 figures stood outside under falling rain, all smiling. Marceline looked over at it and caught her breath. The woman in the picture wasn't sitting in a scooter. She was standing. She glanced at the gates once more, then set her coffee down. From her bag, she pulled out a leather folder. The kind meant for business meetings. She opened it to reveal page after page of printed schedules, event times, speaking notes, travel plans. Every hour of her life for the next week was accounted for. Without hesitation, she reached into her purse, took out a pen, and drew a single line down the middle of every page. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper felt louder than the announcements outside. When she was done, she closed the folder and set it aside. Daniel watched without speaking. I'm not going, she said quietly. I don't know what comes next, but I want to figure that out for myself. Daniel's eyes stayed steady on hers. Then you're already on your way. Micah looked up from his drawing. Does that mean you missed your train? Marceline leaned toward him, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead. No, she said. It means I changed my destination. The boy smiled and reached for another piece of paper. Then I have to make a new picture. Outside the small vending area, the rain had lightened to a mist. Passengers hurried along the platform, pulling suitcases through the damp air. The train to the capital pulled away, its windows glowing warm against the gray afternoon. Marceline didn't watch it leave. Instead, she turned her scooter toward the main exit, Daniel and Micah falling in step beside her. You ever been to a bookstore in a town with only one traffic light? Daniel asked. She shook her head. Not yet. Then maybe that's where you start, he said. They walked together through the station, weaving around travelers with luggage. Marceline moved at her own pace. No one rushed her. No one directed her path. Every turn she made was her own choice. When they reached the doors, the air outside smelled of rain and fresh pavement. Micah skipped ahead, his sketchbook tucked under one arm, calling back for them to hurry. Marceline paused at the threshold. For the first time in months, she wasn't following a timetable. There was no one waiting with expectations. The quiet freedom of that realization filled her more than any formal event ever could. She looked at Daniel. "Thank you," she said simply. He shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. You decided this yourself." "Still," she smiled. "Maybe, but sometimes you need someone to notice before you see it clearly." Together, they stepped out into the misty street. The traffic was light, the sound of tires on wet asphalt blending with the distant hum of the station. Micah pointed down the road toward the taxi stand. "That way," he said with certainty, as if he already knew the route to their next stop. Daniel glanced at Marceline. "Shall we?" "We shall," she replied, the corners of her mouth lifting. And so they moved on, not toward a train, but toward something new. The bookstore was still miles away, the rain still falling, but the destination didn't matter as much as the company along the way. As they walked, Marceline realized she wasn't thinking about what she had left behind. She was thinking about where her next step might lead. And for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't scare her. It felt like the start of a journey she wanted to take. The mist in the air clung to her scarf, the cool dampness settling on her skin. She didn't brush it away. She let it stay, a reminder of where she was, in motion, in choice, in her own story. The street ahead curved gently, disappearing from view. Somewhere beyond it, a small bookstore waited. But for now, there was only this moment. 3 people walking together into whatever came next. And Marceline Hart, once bound to someone else's plans, felt her own life begin to open.